All right, try and get this up out of the way so they can see. Okay, well, we've been starting on the study of the judges. Really haven't got started on the judges. We were doing timelines. I have this marked when I finished my last 3 weeks. Seems like it's we're at a bit of a stalemate, as it were, for time frames, but it's good to establish kind of when the judges happened, who was judging who, and when we were going through it, I don't know if you remember, but we talked a lot about overlap on judges. So where some people might say, well, the period of the judges took 450 years. That's if you took all the judges and you put them, like, for example, Othniel running a full period of 40 years, and then you had Ehud running a full 80, and so on and so forth. If you add them all up, you might get to that. But when we get further into the judges, all of a sudden they start to pile on top of each other in a sense, because then we had judges that actually some would rule in the northern zone. At the same time, there would be a judge in a southern area. So they were running coinciding with each other. So we established then that the period of the judges actually was about 336 years in total when you take all and figure out which judge ruled at what time at the same time as who. And we'll get into that further as we go. So there's no sense spending a whole pile of time on that. So that we want to, get to our first judge and start looking at that and finding out what do we learn from Othniel and so on and so forth. But again, before we get there, I just want to finish off this time piece. And so we'll kind of go over that. If there's any questions, we'll get them as we go here. This screen we've already done, and it's talking about Ehud liberating Israel from Moab by killing Eglon. It seems like when we start looking at the judges, the people themselves, it says they did that which was evil, and they did that which was right in their own eyes again, which was evil in God's eyes. Generally, they'd fall away, worship idols, and therefore they were brought into oppression by someone. For example, with Othniel, we'll get into him. They were oppressed by a nation, and then Eglon was Moab, and then with Gideon it was the Midianites, and so on and so forth, Philistines. So it seems that these judges, the people, actually followed the judge, but didn't really own the following of God to themselves. And really, you can't go to the kingdom on somebody's back. And that's kind of where it seemed like the people went. So when a judge died, very shortly after, they were found worshiping idols again. They were back to sinning again. They just couldn't maintain in their lives peace and order and following God without somebody there leading them. So the people themselves, we find, are very weak. And so that's a lesson we can learn from them as well, from the judges, is that we need to take ownership of the truth, and we need to understand that we are responsible for our actions through our lives, and we will stand at the judgment seat for our own sins and for our own good doings, if you want to call it that way. So that as we go through this, I think we'll find that's a kind of a pattern as well. We had the pattern we always look at in the judges is they, excuse me, they sinned, they suffered, they sought God, and then he brought salvation. It's kind of the 4 S's. But there's more patterns in the judges, as we're going to find out. Patterns like maybe we're going to find out how much of a type of Christ we find in the judges. So we're going to look at Othniel first and find out how he was perhaps a type of Christ in part of his life. And then we're going to find Ehud, and we'll see where Ehud fits and how he is a type of Christ. So if we keep an eye open on these patterns as we go, that might help us in our study. So anyway, we'll just go on to the next slide here. A summary of dates and events. So again, we're just summarizing everything that we've taken on the first section that we covered in the first 3 weeks, which was quite a long time ago, actually. So what we know for certain from events and reasonably sure on general dates. The oppression of Eglon, king of Moab, was 1302 to 1284 BC, which we'll get to probably this time frame anyways. And it's talking about Naomi. When did she leave Bethlehem? And it was when Israel was under the curse of famine, and when Eglon was oppressing Israel. Eglon was the king of Moab. We know that Naomi lived in Moab for 10 years with their two sons. When her two sons died, it was then they returned to Bethlehem. We know Naomi returned to Bethlehem when the famine was over because Israel had repented. Eglon was killed by Ehud. Naomi's two sons killed in the Ehud liberation against Moab. The 10 years Naomi was in Moab ended when Eglon and her two sons were killed. We know at that time, or we'll get to that time, is there was an 80-year period of peace after the Moabite oppression. So there was a good period of peace following Ehud's time frame. And it was actually, if you look at it, there was Othniel was 40 years of peace. Ehud was exactly double. So there was 80 years of peace through Eglon, again, or Ehud. So we'll get to that as we get going. So I don't want to spend a whole pile of time studying the actual guys themselves right now, but this is more or less just to establish our time frames. Again, this is small writing, but we don't even really have to go through it, but it's talking once again at the start where 1350 Joshua dies. We go through all the time periods of what and when, and then we get down to 1207 BC. Obed, David's grandfather, was born to Ruth and Boaz. Ruth would be about 90. Naomi would be about 120. So these are all, again, time frames. It goes through all the things that happened kind of in that time frame from Joshua to basically Boaz and Obed. So it's we just compiled all the things that we talked about again. And if you can't remember, if you need a copy of this, I don't mind sending a copy of slides or whatever, just to kind of help if you were doing notes at all for anything. But again, like we talked about it on a Friday, no, I guess it was a Monday night or a Friday night. We talked about in the readings history and time frames. How do we know that these are time frames? Well, there's some things that have been established by history and archaeology, and just kind of gone back and proven. For example, we talked about the stele that was found, and that was to prove the time frame. I guess it was in around the Ehud reign era, somewhere in there, 1205. So there has been proof to put dates to some of these incidences as well. So it's may not be important to say, well, when did it happen? It's more important, so when it happened, what do we learn from it? So that's kind of where we want to go. But to establish kind of where the judges are, that's why I did this. Again here, there's a whole series of passages that directly link a lack of rain, failed crops, and famine to Israel. I think I went back on this because there was some question about the time frame of Ruth and Naomi. So I went back and found a few more proofs and whatnot to make that fit. Notice that Elimelech, Naomi, and the two sons had considerable farmland. They had to move to Moab where there was food. And again, there's the proof of it in Ruth 1. Yahweh visited his people, indicates Israel had repented, and then the 10 years again was over, and they were moving back because Ehud had taken care of Eglon, and there was peace. So it's kind of a whole picture about where people fit into the time periods. Okay, finally, yes, we come to the first judge. Takes a while. So the first judge name is Othniel. We're not really given a whole lot of information on a lot of these judges. Sometimes we get a few verses. Sometimes we get, a chapter or two, but we don't get a whole lot. Like, for example, I've been setting up for the second judge for Ehud. And really, Ehud, there's only 18 verses. That's all we have about him. So we don't know a lot about him, and yet we do know a lot about him. So it's sometimes some of the things that aren't said that we want to dig into, but there's also it establishes who they are, what kind of people, why were they chosen, and we'll find some interesting things, hopefully, about Othniel that when I was looking at it, that I really didn't know. So hopefully, you'll find the same information helpful. So Strong's means force of God or line of God. So that kind of gives us an indication of who Othniel is going to be a type of. So it's a line of God. The Hebrew Bible refers to Othniel as Othniel, the son of Kenaz, the brother of Caleb. And the expression is inconclusive in Hebrew and has been taken to mean either that Othniel himself was the brother of Caleb, or that Othniel's father Kenaz was the brother of Caleb. And it's very confusing sometimes in Scripture when you see someone was the son of or the brother of. It means that they were probably kin of instead. So, and I think that's kind of where we're leaning to here with Othniel, more than being the brother of Caleb, that he was probably related to him, but it was more their dads that were brothers and not Caleb and Othniel. So otherwise, when he got Caleb's daughter to wife, it would have been more of an incestuous relationship than it would have been. Sid?
Well, we know that Caleb was, if this is the Caleb I'm thinking of, his father's name was Jeshoni. Mm-hmm. So there you have him separated from Othniel.
This was Caleb of, let me just go back, I gotta find him here.
Might be the wrong guy.
Yeah.
Would be, wouldn't it? Yeah, it just would be too late on, too far along.
This was the Caleb that, you remember when Joshua said, who's gonna go up and fight Hebron? And he was like 80 years old, and he went up and took it.
This is that Caleb?
I believe so.
Well, then this would have to be Caleb's son, Kenaz?
This is Caleb, Othniel, the son of Kenaz, the brother of Caleb. So the Kenizzites. I got it here somewhere. I just got to find it here real quick. Yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm in one, but I just didn't go down far enough, I guess. So we've got an Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. Yeah, that's the verse that I'm at here. Just hold on here. Search. Nope. It's in the chapter before in Joshua. It goes back in Joshua.
So Othniel would be Caleb's grandson then.
Othniel, no.
Nephew.
He would be his nephew.
Right. So this would be, Caleb would be his great uncle.
I think maybe you're thinking of Joshua 15 verses 16 to 17.
You betcha, I'm just getting there. And Caleb said, he that smiteth Kirjath Japhar, I will take it and give to Achsaph, my daughter, to wife. And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, the brother of Caleb, took it. So that's, that we'll get to that one actually, but, and also when you look up, yeah, it says, I'll have to look on that one again. I'll have to look that one up a bit more. I thought I had it right here, but I just know there's confusion in Scripture when it comes to talking about who's related to who. It says that Talmud argues that Othniel was Caleb's brother, but I think they find that it's not supported in many things. So It says, when Caleb promises the hand of his daughter Axa to whoever conquers the land of Debir, it's Othniel who rises to the challenge and thus becoming Caleb's son-in-law. So Othniel now became Caleb's son-in-law.
As well as his nephew?
As well as his nephew. And so it's most likely that Othniel was Caleb's cousin and not his brother. So that's kind of the conclusion we come to out of it.
His nephew?
Well, I have cousin, but related. It's hard to know through this, so.
The Hebrew description of relationships is not as specific as our English is. It quite often can say a brother and mean a cousin, or sometimes it says a son and it means a grandson or great grandson.
And it's really confusing when you start looking at it. You think, oh, that's the answer, and then you say, oh, wait a minute, no, it isn't. So, yeah. At any rate, I'm just trying to determine, I guess, who Othniel is and where he kind of came from. So he's the guy that stood up and said, okay, I'm going to go and I'll take it. And he gets Axa. And the point, I guess, that we want to get out of this is that he is the one that stood up. He was the guy that was somebody just sent a note. Eileen did. First Chronicles 4:15. She put that. I just disappeared that note. Kenaz was grandson of Caleb. Question mark.
Hey, what was that again?
First Chronicles 4:15 was a question. First Chronicles 4:15. It says, and the sons of Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, Iru, Elah, and Naam, and the sons of Elah, even Kenaz, and the sons of Jehaleel, Ziph, and so on and so forth. So, I guess that's how it ties in Kenaz.
What about verse 13? Sons of Kenaz, Othniel, and Sariah, and the sons of Othniel, who's that?
Yeah.
I think makes sense here.
No. Okay.
Seems like they reused that name Kenaz between verse 13 and verse 15. They could have come up with something different.
Yeah. Yeah, they could have. But I guess when you look at it, and if we think that Caleb was, I think Caleb's name means dog, and if it's a representation of the Gentiles, and so the Jews and the Gentiles, get into the land. I'm just going to get rid of this. Get into the land in type. That would mean that Jews and Gentiles, are saved. Now I'm talking about when Joshua comes into the land. So you have Jew and Gentile. And then you have a continuation of it when you have Othniel, and he's going to be the guy that God chooses to be the first judge in Israel.
It's interesting when you look up the word son. It can mean everything. Like it can mean a servant, a son, a steward, a stranger, a grandson. It's very much subject to the context, I guess. And same thing with the word that's used there for brother. The word ach means can mean a kindred, of the same kindred. And so it's got quite a wide definition, really.
Yes. And I know when we've ever done son, Reagan and then Yvonne put story of the Bible has Othniel as half brother of Caleb. I'm gonna add that one for
I
you.
think you better give up on his own.
Yeah. Austin just loves it.
It's like trying to figure out family.
Just loves it. Don't you love these family tweets?
Yeah. Where you see a Kenite?
Which one? Yeah. He was related to the Kenizzites, yes.
So
they were in the land. When you look at it, they were in the land that when they came into the land, they were supposed to move them out, but And that was a time before, so I would think probably what happened was that they joined in with Israel. Probably some of them, it could have been in the wilderness. I don't know exactly where they joined in, but that they seen what was going on. So
That was Moses' family, or his wife's family.
well, they were from Midian, right? Or down in that area. Yeah. Anyway, kind of throw lots of things out there into the mix and see what we got. It's still a mix, sir. So I've got some information on Caleb here, which Austin's going to love. So Caleb is referred to as Caleb, the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, in multiple places. So in Numbers 32:12, Joshua 14:6 and 14. And so the question is, who's the Kenizzites? The first mention we see in the Bible of the Kenizzites is Genesis 15:19, where the Kenizzites are listed alongside the Kenites, Hittites, Canaanites, etc. And these people are groups that are said to possess the land, which will be given to Abraham's descendants in 400 years down the road. But that's about it. You don't have a lot of details about them other than that they were in the land already. So, which made it sound to me like, once again, it shows that Gentile connection. What?
They were believers, so weren't they?
Well, they had to be to do what they were, doing. They had to believe.
They seem to be comfortable with Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So the first judge of Israel was not a Jew. Possibly. Partly.
Even partly.
Partly Jew.
Yeah.
Or more like the Melchizedek factor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Chosen by merit, not by descendant.
So I have the question, Caleb the Kenizzite or the Israelite? In the end, we can't answer that question of Caleb's ethnic identity with a high degree of certainty, although I think there are multiple understandings of Caleb's identity as a Kenizzite. Lean toward Caleb being identified as a foreigner, as I mentioned, whose family joined Israel prior to the Exodus. And I think this best explains the mention of Caleb as a Kenizzite, since the people stands out in Genesis 15. Whether or not those Kenizzites are related to Esau, that even seems more unlikely. So it just makes sense to me that God has been involved with the Jews and the Gentiles as a combined unit. It's been in his plan right from the beginning to bring salvation to all those who would turn to him. So through history, there's been a calling, I would say, to the Gentiles as well. Even though the Jews were God's chosen people, there's always been that twig somewhere about the Gentiles, which I think is important for us to realize and understand, is that the calling of the Gentiles, the calling to us, came right from the beginning. That we're all stand related to the promises.
But they were all Syrian, really. I mean, Abraham was Syrian.
He came from Ur, so.
Jacob's a Syrian racial guy. So they recognized they had Gentile roots, but God chose Abraham to make a nation.
Mm-hmm. He did. I think Ur was actually farther over than Syria, though, wasn't it? Ur was more into that Iraqi territory.
Close to Babylon.
Kuwait.
But they were also from Haran.
Well, that's where they walked up to, is the Haran, from Ur. And then from Haran, they crossed over the Euphrates. That's where he became known as the Hebrew. They crossed over.
It may depend on what the meaning of the word Syrian is. It may have might have been some sort of other description than a nationality.
Yeah, I didn't look up what Syrian meant. Brother Ed?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that if Caleb was a Gentile proselyte to Israel and accepted in, then it's interesting that there was just the two, an Israelite and a Gentile, that gave the good report of the Promised Land.
Yeah, that's exactly true. That's why when they came out, who was it that gave the report? It's Jew and Gentile. I would think that's Very important point. Very important point. That's it.
The Israelites being, as they have always been quite stuck to their history, should have been able to see the tie when the apostles in the New Testament started teaching truth to the Gentiles. Well, they should have thought back on this and said, this isn't anything really that new.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, we'll just keep moving along here. If Caleb was from a Kenizzite family, he completely and full-heartedly embraced his new identity with Israel and completely trusted God to fulfill his promises. He truly had been a foreigner. He had turned his back on his former life and embraced Israel, the God of Israel. Amazingly, God used him at 85 years old. He was instrumental in removing the sons of Anak from the hill country of Judah. And I couldn't help but think also, when they came into the land, the first thing they come to is Jericho. Jericho was a symbol of sin itself. But in that, there was Rahab and her family, whoever was with her. And they also completely and full-heartedly embraced Israel, and that's why when she put it says the scarlet thread out her window, that word is tikva. And so it's like she put out the hope of Israel out her window, knowing that God was able to save her and her family. And when, of course, they went in, Jericho was knocked down, they put Rahab outside the camp to begin with. And then, after, she would have learned the ways and whatnot, would have been brought in. And obviously now we should look back and we can see her as one of the names running in Christ's line. So, you look at God using Gentiles in history. There's just another case of it. That's all. That's it.
Yeah, just looking at that last sentence up on the screen there. God used him at 85 years old, and he was instrumental in removing the sons of Anak from the hill country of Judah. And we think that, sometime soon to come, the king of the north will be destroyed on the hills of Judah. I wonder if there's some kind of a tie in that that the multitudinous Christ will be consisting of more than just Jews, Jews and Gentiles.
Right. Well, I would think so. If it's the multitudinous Christ, it would make up all those who are saved, both Jew and Gentile. Just another note popped up on the screen, Numbers 32:12. I didn't get it real quick here, so I'll just bring it up. Numbers 32:12 was brought up by somebody saved. Okay, let's see. Surely none of the men that came up out of Egypt from 20 years old and upward shall see the land which I swear unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob, because they have not wholly followed me, save Caleb the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, and Joshua the son of Nun, for they have wholly followed the Lord. And I think that goes with what you were saying, Ed, about the Jews and Gentiles as well. That's maybe the point there. That's it.
Yeah, you mentioned at the beginning there about the, sort of the up and down of Israel. They would fail, and they had to be brought back to God. And I think the lesson out of that is that we can always wander from God, and we're more inclined to wander when the times are good. And so often, when Israel returned to God, he blessed them, and those blessings, they turned around and drew them away from him. And when they were prosperous, they were, it seemed like seemed like the good times went to their head, and that's the weakness of human nature. And the thing is when we don't have something to lead us to God, the world is out there with well-lit exits, and it's very easy for us to exit our relationship with God in favor of the world if we're not watching for it.
Mhm. I think that's the danger side of it. We think we're pretty safe if we're in the truth and we're baptized and we come to classes, we do the readings, that we're pretty safe. But there's no safety without constant putting your hand to the plow. We're designed to fail. We're no better than Israel. We are no better than Israel. Israel failed. They went away and followed other gods. They might have had, gods of wood and stone that they were following, but, we have our own gods that can easily take away our time or our minds, like lots of things. So really, it's quite easy. The Lord first and then Sid.
Yeah, I don't know how far back the idea goes that if they believe that if you were righteous, God would bless you.
Mhm.
If you weren't, He would curse you. And there's some basis for that in some of the readings, but at the same time, blessings can be a trial.
Often
They
are.
are.
Yeah, often are.
Yeah.
Sid?
Yeah, it went from me. What I was going to say.
It's all right. It'll come back.
Make sure the sieve.
Is that one of those sieve things? It's interesting. We were talking about gods, following other gods, and when we get to Ehud, which will probably be maybe in a couple Sundays from now, if it happens. But I was just thinking, and when it says when Ehud, they went to give the tribute to the king Eglon, and they all left, and then it says he turned at the quarries and went back, and when you start, I just did a little quick look up on the quarries and whatnot before I came here, and the quarries, if you look at the Strong's word, is actually idols. And it's even thought that they made it to Gilgal back before he turned and went back. So what was the idols? What was the quarries where Ehud turned back? And the figures most likely the 12 stones that Joshua had taken out of the river and set up on the edge, that they had desecrated and turned into idols again to worship. And that's kind of what sparked him. It just kind of lit him up and said, you know what, this is ridiculous. We're being oppressed. This king is oppressing us. We've fallen so far away. That's the reason we're being oppressed by this king. So he turned back at the quarries and went back, and that's when he kind of poked him a good one. So when we're talking about gods and we're talking about how easy it is to fall away, things like the stones that came out of the river were to remind them of God's deliverance, God's goodness, His mercy, that they had desecrated and turned into idol worship. And I think that's what sparked Ehud to do what he did. Sid?
Wasn't it Jeroboam that told Israel, "Leave be thy God, O Israel, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt"?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And over and over and over again, God said, "I am the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt." So they were using idolatry to try and shave the people off from God's influence so that they could have them.
Mm-hmm.
It was sort of a early mixture of religion and politics.
Well, they weren't hardly out of the land, and they made that golden idol. Aaron fashions it and said, well, this just popped up, and the people are saying, well, here's the God that brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. It was right away. I mean, they didn't get even far out of the land, and they were desecrating God's name. So couldn't see them. It seems like they had to have something in front of them to worship, like all the other people around. It's why one of the reasons they wanted a king, because all the other nations had a king. So
I think the thing that took them away to idolatry so often is sort of mentioned, in that incident of Aaron's calf, it says they ate and drank and rose up to play. It was a fun thing to worship the idols. And the nations around, I mean, really what has Christianity in general done with the Christmas holiday? They've made it into a big party because somebody else died on the cross. It's a desecration in itself, and it's the same sort of thing. It's attractive to human nature to want to have a good time and in the words of Christmas, all be jolly and take the seriousness out of life. And God kind of mourned Israel making their worship of him too serious. He said, well, is this the feast that I wanted you to keep, to afflict yourselves and all of these things? He wanted them to rejoice in their worship of him. So it was kind of the two extremes that drove people to idolatry. They were making a big deal of worshiping God and making it such a serious thing, which it is serious, but making it an affliction to themselves. And the contrast was all the fun that the nations around were having worshiping their gods, which was, a lot of wickedness went along with it as well. But
that's why it's important to know that these guys came out from that land when we're talking about Caleb, for example, turning his back completely on their old way of following. So Othniel, it's interesting because we read of this man Jabez in First Chronicles, and I thought this was kind of an interesting thing. I've often wondered, who is Jabez? I don't know if you've ever heard of him or thought of him, but quite often you see in Bible stores the prayer of Jabez. If you turn to First Chronicles chapter 4, and you look in verses 9 to 10, and it's a very simple thing. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's a prayer of Jabez, and it says, and Jabez was more honorable than his brethren, and his mother called his name Jabez, saying, because I bear him with sorrow. And Jabez called on the God of Israel, saying, oh, that thou wouldst bless me indeed, enlarge my coast, and that thine hand might be with me, and that thou wouldst keep me from evil, and that it may not grieve me. And God granted him that which he requested. That's all we read of Jabez. That is it. And yet you find this guy Jabez, like I said, in Bible stores. It's written about the prayer of Jabez. You can find it online. And it was about enlarging his coast and keeping him from evil. And I think that's the way the world is looking at this prayer, is enlarge our coast and keep us from evil. And God granted him that which he requested. That's it, 2 verses. And when you look at it, the Jewish rabbis do believe that Othniel is this Jabez in a different name. So I think I just want to look at that real quick to see, is it possible? And I think when we start to find out what Othniel asked and what Othniel's wife asked, we're going to find it's very similar to what the request of Jabez was here. So, we just read all this. So, Aksa is what she said this to his wife. Othniel's wife said this: go to Caleb and ask this for me, will you? So Othniel goes to Caleb and says in Joshua 15:18, it came to pass as she came unto him that she moved him to ask her father a field. And she lighted off her ass, and Caleb said unto her, what wouldst thou? Who answered, give me a blessing, for thou hast given me the south land, give me also springs of water. And he gave her the upper springs and the nether springs. This is the inheritance of the tribe of the children of Judah according to their families. Go back to the prayer of Jabez. Oh, that thou would bless me indeed and enlarge my coast. that thine hand might be with me. And we know that God was with Othniel in his battles and was with him in his life. Othniel was a faithful man, and if God chose him to be his first judge, we know that he did walk with him and that he would keep him from evil, especially when he fought Cushan Rishathaim. Thank you, Austin. Thank you very much.
This is what you want, just notice that that's part of the genealogy of Judah. And, down in verse 13, it lists, sons of Kenas among.
Where are you, Gordon?
In,
Chapter 4?
4.
Yeah. Sons of Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and so, yeah.
I don't know if it matters.
It's not a big thing, but it was one thing that I always wondered, who was Jabez? It made me think one time when we were at a store, and I was looking at this prayer of Jabez. I'll just get right to you here, Regan. We were Sandra and I were at a Bible store, and I saw this prayer of Jabez, and I thought that'd make a great exhortation. You know, if the world's looking at this Jabez, but I had no idea who he really was, but the words were, you know, had some good meaning to it. So I think I developed an exhortation centered around this Jabez, but now that I'm doing the Judges, it seems to lend some credence that perhaps there's some truth here. Brother Regan.
There's one more place that Jabez is found. It's 1 Chronicles 2, verse 55. And it says, the families of the scribes which dwelt at Jabez, so with Jabez being a place, the Tirathites, the Shimeathites, and the Sukathites, these are the Kenites that came of Hemath, the father of the house of Rechab. So I don't know exactly how that ties into the Kenizzites or if it's anything the same, but just thought I'd found that.
Which verse?
1 Chronicles 2, verse 55.
55. All right. I was not quite there. Okay. The families of the scribes which dwelt at Jabez. Yeah, Jabez was a place there. Jabez, there I have located, well, it's north of Hebron, just south of Jerusalem, somewhere between Hebron and Jerusalem, a little bit closer to Jerusalem. Anyways, so that's kind of why I thought for a minute, if he's related to our judges, and you come to this in your readings, you might think about it and say, you know, is it possible? I'm not going to stand here and tell you Jabez is Othniel, but it certainly leans some understanding and some proof that it possibly is, just because of what he asked and knowing that God was with him through his life there. So. So one more thing here on this, Jabez Othniel. The Babylonian Talmud is explicit that this Jabez was Othniel, who was the younger brother of Joshua. That is, Othniel, which name means lion of God, had married the daughter of Caleb, whose name in Hebrew means dog. This Othniel became the first judge of Israel. The Babylonian Talmud suggests that the protection from evil requested by Jabez, or Othniel, may have included not only reference to his own dissociation from the stigma of his name of birth, Jabez, which he afflicts or he gives pain, or perhaps the family of his father-in-law, dog, but also reference for protection from idolatry and incursions of the land by the enemies of Israel, which were the major concerns during the time of the Judges, which is kind of what I mentioned already. So the Babylonian Talmud also believes that this is Jabez, Othniel. Okay. Before we get into Othniel as a type of Christ, I kind of wanted to go back to Othniel being called to be a judge. And that's in chapter 3. In about verse 7, where it starts to talk about the children of Israel doing evil in the sight of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God. They served Balaam and the grove. So again, as we were mentioning and Sid had mentioned, they had to have, something that was in front of them. They had to have something that was tangible. So they went for the Balaams and the Groves, the Asherahs. Therefore the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. And the children of Israel served Cushan-Rishathaim 8 years. And if we just pause there for a second and we look at that word served, you're going to find that word served throughout the Judges. And the word is abad. I don't have it up in front of me. I have it there for Ehud. But it means to be in bondage, to serve in bondage. And you know, when they were in bondage in Egypt, it was horrendous. They said it was more than what they could bear. And so we read it quickly. And the children of Israel served Cushan-Rishathaim 8 years. Well, it means they were in hard bondage at that time frame, as they were with the king of Moab as well. The king of Moab, you remember, was Eglon, and Eglon was a little chubbly bubbly, and he didn't get chubby because he just loved to eat, and that's just the way it was. It's just that because it showed his style of life, that he lived on having other people serve him, and he didn't do much for himself. And so he also, Israel served Eglon for quite a period of time too, and it was 18 years. So
it was kind of a practice back in those days that one nation would put another to tribute. So even if they were in their own places doing their own work, the tax that they had to pay to the conquering king would have made them into slaves every day to him. So they wouldn't necessarily have had to have been direct slaves of him. All he had to do was put the land to tribute, and they'd be slaves to him in everything they did.
Yeah, which they were, because remember, that's why Ehud went to Eglon, is he took him the tribute money.
Yeah.
You know, on behalf of the group, there was 2 or 3 of them that went and took tribute money. But there was more than that. They basically had to provide for them as well. So, and you know, Eglon, one of his houses was in Jericho, which again was a typification of sin itself. So everything was related to sin about him. So, but it just shows the oppression that they were under and why they would have cried upon God. If it was just tribute money and they got to worship as they wanted, keep their gods, it wouldn't have been so bad. But something more must have happened for them to cry out to God. You know what I mean? So I could pay somebody money and just say, well, here's your 50% for taxes and still live my life. But it was more than that. They were being very much oppressed. And it doesn't say that so much in the words here, but when you look up that word served, it gives you that. I'll just see if I can find it real quick here, just so that I've got it on another slide in a different place, but served here. So it's abad, to work in any sense, by implication, to serve, till, enslave, keep in bondage, be bondmen, bond service, compel, so on and so forth. So it kind of gives you that idea of what they were doing. So they did this under Cushan-Rishathaim 8 years, and continues on in verse 9. And when the children of Israel cried unto the Lord raised up a deliverer to the children of Israel, who delivered them, even Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he judged Israel, and went out to war. And the Lord delivered Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, into his hand, and his hand prevailed against Cushan-Rishathaim, and the land had rest 40 years. Do you see how much we have of Othniel there? They did evil in verse 7. By verse 11, they're dwelling in peace and safety for 40 years. There isn't a lot. Good.
Oh, mind the bring this up at chapter 3 starts out, now these are the nations which the Lord left through Israel by them.
Right.
I always took it that it was disobedience, not destroying them or removing them, but it seems like here it puts back on almost on God that he
think there was something when you go back that if they had taken all of that, it would have caused problems because it would have opened up the land too much and there would have been no one to serve and whatnot. I just can't remember, but there's a place in Joshua where it talks about them not slaying all of them. But they were supposed to go in and clean up the land, and they did have campaigns. He did have the northern campaign, he did have the southern campaign. And they did take a lot of the nations, but there was a lot of them left that never touched. Who were the Philistines? Where they come from? Sid?
I think probably, again, the idolatry comes into the picture. They partnered up with these people and worshiped their gods and joined in their fun. And as a result, God said, if you want to have relation with these other nations instead of with me, let's just see how that works for you. You know, again, it's that thing, be careful what you want. Because God is likely to give it to you in greater amounts than what you're ready for.
Right.
And so he give them to those people who they have thought were so great and so much fun to be around, and they found out that that was just nothing but slavery. And if they turned around and cried to God, and that's one of the wonderful things about our God is that he is willing to help us to come back to him if that's what we want to do. But he really is looking for people who want to serve him and not people who are forced to serve him.
Right. I think that's the whole point, isn't it? Is that he's looking for a people that will choose. That's what I was saying right from the very beginning. The people seemed like if they didn't have a judge, or Joshua for that matter, they were a mess. They needed somebody to follow because they couldn't follow themselves. They couldn't keep themselves straight. I mean, you look at those further down in those verses where Gordon started reading in verse 6, it says, and they took their daughters to be their wives and gave their daughters to be their sons and served their gods. Well, that's what happened in the days of Noah. You know, the sons of God and the daughters of men. They started to intermingle. And so then they would have adopted some of their ideas, and certainly a lot of fun. So, and then what happens? God brings in an oppressor. This happened to be Cushan Rishthaim. They don't mind coming in there, but that was who they dwelt among. It says the children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. It doesn't say they stayed separate from them. It says they dwelt among them. And then they intermarried. And of course, you know, you become father and daughter-in-law and father and mother-in-law to, you know, sin. And then all of a sudden they, hey, you know, like, we'll bring over our idols and we'll worship them today. And pretty soon God's completely out of the picture. We've got other things to do. Good? No. Is it any different today without any of us, really?
Right, but I'm thinking, the trouble they're going through right now is from the surrounding nations. And Israel is actually quite cosmopolitan, which isn't a good thing, probably. But what they're doing today is making them, it's making them stand out to the nations. Most nations aren't backing them, which has always happened to history. They always stood out like a sore thumb because they're God's people, but not because they're racist.
No. But they could, you know, I mean, they could have, but they didn't, so they chose not to. They chose to follow their own ways again.
Yeah, I think what we're looking at in Israel today is a result of these people around that they didn't take out. And God said, you'll get in there and you'll keep some of those people around and you won't drive them all out and they'll become thorns in your side. And, you know, that's sort of the you listen to Andy Walton's, lectures on the inner ring ward, he says, you know, they're removing the thorns out of their sides, and that's where they came from, is from them not doing a complete job in the first place. Yeah, that's right, they were supposed to gradually take over the land so that they would populate it as they went, but it was, you know, a test, like in the first verse there, these are the nations which the Lord left to prove Israel by them. So he told them to gradually drive them out. So there were some of them left around that they should have said, no, these are the wicked, they've got to go. He left them there to test them, to see if they would keep them there or if they would take them out as they were supposed to. And of course, he knew what they were going to do. They were going to keep some of them.
Right. I think I was trying to find that proof on it real quick, and I think it was to do with he didn't want him to go in and take all that. Otherwise, it would be a haunt for jackals and stuff like that. So he was supposed to leave some people there, and then, but that's just probably why, right? So that they could be proven as well. So. Okay, well, I think our time is up here, so we're going to leave it off there. We'll start next week. The Othniel as a type of Christ. I've got a couple, 3 slides on that, and then we're going to go into Ehud, find out who he was, why was he important, and that probably will wrap up our 3 weeks after the end of Ehud. So